Hello, welcome to this live stream. Thank you for your support here on Locals. I am super excited to adjust this camera so it's a little better, and then we'll jump into it. So, hey, cool, Bill, it's cool to see you on, and Keeney Music, as always, it's cool to have you on. And we're going to be playing with the live from California. It's going to be a good one. We're going to cover some good stuff, and as always, we're going to be geeking out about music theory. So a lot has happened since the last live stream. So let's cover what we've gone over. And just so you know, I'm rocking a cold this morning, so it chose to be full blown right now. So bear with me as I have some sniffles here. So the we're going to be playing with the Sevenths chord map today. Getting a feel for the design, getting a feel for the use of playing with this and what we can do with it. So that's going to be the main focus, though there are going to be a couple of other things we'll touch on, and I'll just touch on them briefly here at the start. So lesson 20 rolled out, and that is the lesson, the climax of part 5 in the course. And it is conduit between the course and what lies ahead. So it's wrapping up it's kind of a synopsis, not kind of, it is a synopsis of the course materials. The playlist is at mycolormusic.com, where you can get through all the course materials. If you're not familiar with the playlists, I'm going to pull that up right now. And I had it open, but maybe that tab closed. So let me just pull that up really quick, and oh, come on now. Just one sec. That's weird. Let me go. Okay, let me share this. If you can see this. Okay, so the library is here now. On Locals, you have access to all of these posts. As a supporter, you have access to all of these materials. Though Locals is designed more for current issues, kind of talking heads, I guess, talking about current issues. And so because they're current issues, it's a blog post style interface. And whereas music theory is more evergreen, the content never dies because it's like math. It just is its own thing. And so I've created this site, mycolormusic.com, which is really just a bunch of playlists to access the materials that are available at Locals. You can find them on Locals, but it's much easier to find them here. So when I refer to the music theory course, parts 1 through 5, it's way easier to find the links here. It's just in a playlist. And lesson 20 came out. And I'm not logged in, so I'm not going to be able to show you. But it is, like I say, the climax of part 5, and also looking ahead to the what is coming ahead. And what is coming ahead also includes. Now, the funny thing is, let me try to log in really quick. Do you have those credentials? Because I'm going to share. I was planning on sharing some images just from the library, from the playlists here. So let me see if I can quickly jump in to that. Maybe it's going to be saved. Pardon the. There we go. Oh yes, I think it is saved. Okay, awesome. I'm good. Thank you. All right, so let's look at this. So lesson 5, lesson 20, I should say, of part 5, looks ahead to some things to come, including scales. So this first post on the harmonic minor scale there's a short video that explains how this pattern works, along with diagrams that explain where this scale comes from in terms of its own little kind of scale family, along with the relative modes with harmonic minor scale, how it appears on the fretboard, the chords that are derived from the scale, and how they appear on the guitar. So I'm just going to play this pattern quickly to just kind of get a feel for the sound of this. So harmonic minor scale is similar to the Aeolian mode, but with a raised 7. That 7 is what gives it a distinctive sound. Now with these diagrams, we're using the C harmonic minor scale, but of course this pattern applies to all 12 keys. So this is the first of the all guitar scales and modes playlist or series that is referenced in lesson 20. So I'd love to get your feedback on the layout of this, if these diagrams are helpful, and if there is anything that can make this more useful for you as a series going forward. Again, this is just the first of the series. There are literally thousands of scales and modes that will be rolling out with the diagrams, how they appear in context with other scales and modes, how they appear on the fretboard, and also the harmonies that are derived from them. Lots of good stuff. So part 5, really, like I say, is the climax. Lesson 20 summarizes where we've been and is a liftoff into a whole universe of sound and musical patterns. So fun stuff is in the works. Music theory is, music is in essence a cyclical multicolor branch of audible mathematics. And being mathematics, you don't need to know equations. You don't need to, have a protractor out and calculating stuff. But it is in essence patterns. And these patterns are cyclical, symmetrical, and ultimately infinite in the kinds of permutations and patterns that you can create from them. And therefore, diagrams like this, it's kind of the sidewalk never ends. It's this endless, almost overwhelming, frankly, world of music to map out and explore. So there's a lot to come, a lot to dive into and play with. So that's where we're at with the first of that playlist, that first series with scales, and it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so just kind of skimming the wave tops here before we dive into the 7th chord map. Well, let's jump into the chord map. So we've got this 7th chord map here. And if you've been in lesson 20, which on the side, I'm going to pull up this other diagram that I wanted to look at here. Where we come now? Let's get to... It's so strange. Oh, no, here we go. Maybe that'll work. I'm trying to navigate to this correct tab, and I found it right on. Okay, I'm going to pull up. Let me see this here. Okay. This is what I wanted to pull up, and let's get to... Sorry, just getting to the right page here. Aha. Okay, in lesson 19, which is about, in essence, the circle of fifths, there is let me get to it here. Okay. In lesson 19, there's a diagram that's kind of far out where we're talking about how we've built up. Now, if you're new to color music, this is, I'm definitely jumping ahead 19 lessons. I always recommend, highly recommend, that if you're new to color music, in the music theory playlist at mycolormusic.com, definitely start at lesson 0. There's a lesson 0. It even comes before lesson 1, just to get your footing. Definitely go through each part. I've had some questions within the last week where people are saying, hey, I missed something. There's something that I'm missing here. And it's a question that's in a later lesson, which it's answered at length in the previous lessons. So definitely go through each lesson, because every lesson builds on the last. Every concept builds on the last, because music is in essence a form of mathematics, you wouldn't jump into trigonometry without getting a feel for geometry, and without getting a feel for algebra, and without getting a feel for basic arithmetic. Now, part one of the course is called fundamentals, and so it's tempting, especially if you've been playing music or the guitar, any instrument for a little while, you might think, fundamentals, come on. I know there are 12 notes. I know the names of the notes. Good, I'm golden. I'm just going to advance to the next lesson. And especially, part two starts with chords. Chords are a lot of fun to play, and so it's tempting to be like, let's just jump to the fun part. Let's cut to the chase, get into that. When really, part one, lessons 1 through 4, are essential. They lay the groundwork for all of these patterns. So I'm about to show a diagram. We're going to look at the diagram that's in part 5. It's lesson 19. So if you're new to color music, this is going to be a little advanced, but it gives you at least a feel for what's to come, and it helps make sense of the 7th chord map. So this diagram it shows a lot, actually. So we have multiple things going on here. In the inner ring, we have the major scales in the circle of fifths. So we have C, D, E. Well, let's play it here. So we have C, D, E, F, and then G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp G, A, B, C sharp D, and so on. That inner ring is, in essence, a daisy chain of major scales that overlap and form this continuous cycle called the circle of fifths, because every key starts on the 5th note of the previous scale. So G is the 5th note of C, D is the 5th note of G, A is the 5th note of D, and so on. We have this circle of fifths. And then around that, we have around the perimeter of the circle of fifths, we have these almost like petals of a flower that bloom out and are circles of thirds. They're tertian intervals, or major thirds and minor thirds, that show how all of the chords are related. The chords in a given key also form their own little daisy chain patterns, and they link together to form this beautiful pattern that looks like a sunburst or a flower. And this sunburst is like the light that sheds light on music theory. It illuminates all of the patterns of music that are otherwise obscured or hidden by traditional systems like tablature, notation, finger charts, all of that just use uniform black dots and don't convey the underlying symmetry, geometry, and order to music. So this pattern, the circle of fifths, is kind of a lot to take in, right? I mean, even if you have advanced through all of the lessons in sequence through, parts 1 through 5, this is in lesson 19, and it's still, even then, there's a lot of, energy going on here. And ultimately, because music is cyclical, symmetrical, and fractal, in that it's repeating patterns, we can condense this pattern into a more compact, concise view of what's going on here, just like the sun collapsing to, illustrate, or the sun collapsing into a black hole, where it's just more condensed gravity, more condensed space. And in essence, music is, the intersection of space and time, or pitch and rhythm. So this black hole is, in essence, a condensed sun pattern, like we're looking at here, where we take all of this information, we condense it down. Oh, I skipped into, sorry, my hand is making us jump around this PDF. All right, well, in essence, what we're taking this sun pattern of all of these patterns, and we're just squeezing it. And there's an animation. Key Music did the animation for lesson 19 that shows this pattern condensing into, in essence, the chord map. What we have here is this diagram that shows all of those patterns, all of those daisy chain patterns, squeezed into one single cohesive space, and it's seamless, so that we can cycle through and move through harmonic space more fluidly. If you've ever seen the movie Interstellar, Matthew McConaughey, it's a Christopher Nolan film, where the protagonist, Matthew McConaughey, I don't know the character's name, he risks spaghettification and death to go into this black hole, where the black hole ends up being in this sci-fi film, of course, but it's like it's a portal to, or it's, I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's a little bit weird. If you have seen it, it's a little bit weird, but it's in essence kind of like allows him, when he goes in the black hole, he doesn't die. He actually ends up seeing, he's able to look into multiple instances of space, or it's like multi-dimensional, and it's an illuminating kind of psychedelic, strange experience. And in the same way, the circle of fifths is like that, in that all of these patterns condense, and you're able to look around and navigate harmonic space. There is a theory, it's far out, but that black holes are like a portal to other parts of, like a multiverse, where they're like wormholes, where it's condensed space, so it's shortcuts into other areas of space in essence. And the circle of fifths is like that, actually, on a micro level rather than the macro level of the universe itself. And it's cool how it works, actually. And so all that said, let's jump into how we can navigate this harmonic space using the chord map. Now, the chord map this design is essentially the same as the original chord map that we have here. And I've used this in a lot of videos, if you've seen any of the other videos. And I'm still going to be using this chord map. The original chord map is very illuminating, and it's a streamlined, elegant look at these patterns. The Sevenths version has a lot of additional information that can also be busy, or busy on the eyes, I mean, or maybe overwhelming, whereas the original chord map has more of a streamlined look at this. And I've had some people ask, hey, if I have the original, is this just useless now? Like, should I be using the Sevenths chord map? What's up? What should I do? And the answer is both are useful, and I'm going to be using both because each has its advantages and its uses. It's not like software where, okay, this is version 2.0 and this is, outdated and useless. Far from that. It's actually a beautiful tool that will definitely be coming into use. I'm going to be using the Sevenths chord map in videos, because in many videos, not all videos, because it's helpful, and as you'll see, it's insightful into some especially fun patterns or fun concepts that you can apply in your songwriting, like using borrowed chords, chord substitutions, and all of that. So we'll keep going until we until you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Hey, Bill, you said, love the Interstellar soundtrack. Definitely. Nolan consulted with many black hole physicists on keeping the movie accurate to contemporary theories on physics. I have heard that. And yes, the soundtrack is amazing. Is it Hans Zimmerman, I think, where he uses an organ, like this larger than life, almost unsettlingly epic organ, to convey the vast expanse of space. And I have heard that about Christopher Nolan consulting physicists, so that it's not just so far out and unbelievable. The fact that he did consult the physicists about the feasibility of what they conveyed on screen makes it especially cool. Yeah, Zimmerman is the music. It's excellent. It's really, really good. So with this black hole / chord map, let's kind of play around with the design here. Now, what you'll notice, some differences here. The original chord map is, well, one advantage of the original chord map, and especially, if you're over 40, the minute I turned 40, my eyes started to say, hey, let's put these on. Let's put some glasses on. My eyes aren't what they used to be, is what I'm trying to say. And with the Sevenths chord map, you do have additional information. The notes are smaller, so because to fit that into the space, they're the same dimensions, by the way. And so this is just larger print, easier to read without glasses or with glasses. And so the Sevenths chord map has additional information, but in having that additional information, it's a little smaller too. Some of the symbols on there. Now, you'll also see in the original chord map that all of the concentric rings, you have major chords in the inner ring, minor chords in the middle ring, and diminished chords in the outer ring. It's all a white background with a gray perimeter. Whereas with the sevenths chord map, there's more color going on here. We have a light gray with the major chords, a medium gray with the minor chords, and a little darker gray for the diminished chords. And that design reflects some of the concepts discussed in, is it lesson 18, I believe, where in lesson 18 of part 5, we talk about the different consonants or dissonance of the respective chords. And so there are some diagrams that illustrate the circle of fifths with these concentric rings of gray. And then also there are some diagrams that show the patterns of why certain modes, why the various parallel modes sound progressively darker as you go. And it has to do with the relative position of the 1, 4, and 5 and all of the chords as they span the concentric rings of major and minor and diminished chords. So Lydian, for example, has the 1 and the 5 in the major ring and the 4, a sharp diminished 4 in the outer ring. It sounds especially bright. Ionian has the 1, 4, and 5 all in this lighter ring. And so as you go from light to dark, or in a counterclockwise direction from light, Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, and Locrian. Locrian is the darkest of the parallel modes, and you have a 1 in the darker diminished outer ring, and so it sounds especially dark. Phrygian, you have a 1, a 4, and a 5 in the 1 and the 4 are in the relatively dissonant minor ring, and then the 5 is in the darkest or most dissonant outer diminished ring. And so that's, relatively dark compared to, say, Aeolian, which has a 1 and a 5 in the minor ring, but also it has, its 4 is also in the minor ring. So this has more lighter chords or more consonants as it relates to major, minor, and diminished. And so as you go, the 1, 4, and 5 are progressively lighter as you go to the right through the parallel modes or clockwise, and progressively darker or in the more outer rings as you advance into the darker modes. And so these concentric rings of gray, light, middle, and darker gray, illustrate that more at a glance. That's a helpful illustration. Bill, thank you. The grayscale relates to the degrees of dissonance. Yeah, it's just more at a glance. So when you're playing a chord, and we're going to get into borrowed chords and chord substitutions here, where as we're substituting certain chords, you can see how, this substitution, I'll explain that here as we go. But the chord substitutions are illuminated by these concentric rings, the gradation as well. Okay, so from a high level, there's a video that I recently posted about just the general design. It's the same as the original chord map. You have it with parallel modes with 1, major 1, minor 1, and diminished 1, using C as an example. Here we have Lydian has a major 1, Ionian has a major 1, Mixolydian has a major 1, Dorian has a minor 1, Aeolian has a minor 1, Phrygian has a minor 1, and Locrian has a diminished 1. The same thing appears. It's the same structure as far as parallel and relative modes go. So Lydian, using C as an example, with a major 1, a minor 1, and a diminished 1 down here. Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian, we get Aeolian, Phrygian, and Locrian. Same idea, and it's symmetrical and consistent across all 12 keys. I'm just using C as an example here, but we can rotate these layers. And as with the original chord map, when you get a sevenths chord map, you're going to have to loosen up the layers. There's a little bit of grippiness going on, just like breaking in a pair of boots or a baseball glove. there's some grippiness that you just, I have some tips. There's a video that explains how to loosen up the layers. So if you experience that, it's just because it's higher quality, stiffer materials rather than flimsy cardboard and plastic. So let's look at, so the idea of rotating, the numerals layer to the right, you can cycle through relative modes. So I'm just, cycling the minor 1 is an Aeolian. The minor 1 is in this position for Phrygian. The diminished 1, if I keep cycling the Roman numerals, is in this position for Locrian. Or I can rotate these numerals back. So I'm going to have C as the 1. And I can rotate the grouping layer to go through the parallel modes. So that's the cool thing. In lesson, I think it's lesson 18 of the course, we get into the symmetry of the relative and parallel modes in every key. Because music is in essence geometry on steroids, it is all patterns. There's an order, there's a method to the madness, and it has to do with these patterns. So lesson 18 explains this symmetry in detail, to the point of, even as I was writing lesson 18, I was like, it has to do with modes, lesson 18. I was like, it feels like we're getting way into the weeds, talking about the symmetry of modes. What is even going on here? and as you go through, you might be thinking, that's a lot of detail. But the truth is that symmetry informs the practical application of using these patterns. It's not just for head knowledge, it's for hand knowledge. It's to apply these patterns in your music. And it explains ultimately the structure of the chord map and how to navigate harmonic space. So there's more on the symmetry that we're talking about, clockwise versus counterclockwise rotations and all of that in the lesson materials. Let's look at some examples here for using the chord map and the use of chord substitutions and borrowed chords. I've talked about this in another video where we get into the trying to find this. Yes, okay. The use of or how chord substitutions work. And we have a general rule that explains chord substitutions, and that is that you can substitute or swap out different chords if they share 2 notes in common. That's the general rule. So if you're writing a chord progression, writing a song, and you're like, you know what, instead of this chord, this typical chord that one might include, I'm going to actually, I want to swap that out for another chord and add a little flavor or add some unexpected movement that will create some harmonic variety and take my music in different directions. So that's why you would use chord substitutions in the first place. So let's look at an example here. This is a post in the, I think it's in the chords playlist in the library. So we're going to use the standard 1-5-6-4. So in this example, it's a C major chord. So 1, C major, 5 is a G major, A minor is a 6, F major is a 4, and then back to 1. So you've heard that song probably 3 trillion, or that progression 3 trillion times in various songs because it's really, really popular, very common. So 1, 5, 6, 4. And in this illustration here, we're using the original chord map to show where these chords come from in the key of C, with C being 1. It's a 1, 5, 6, 4. Now, if we wanted to kind of switch things up and add some variety, we have this giant arrow here pointing to the 5 saying, hey, let's maybe take this 5, this G major chord, and let's swap it out for something else. So, and this post is in locals. Here we have, instead of the 5, we are going to, or the 5 G major chord, we play the E minor chord, the minor 3, which is directly above it in the middle ring, the minor chords ring. So instead of a 1-5-6-4, we're playing a 1 minor 3-6-4. So it sounds like this. And then back to 1. Sorry, so 1, 3, 6, 4, 1. So it sounds similar to 1, 5, 6, 4. We're going to play 1, 3, 6, 4. And that 3 sounds really good. Now, in this chord map, we see that the minor 3, E minor is directly above G major because G and E minor are relative major and minor chords. Now, that is explained in detail in the course materials, and you can see it in the circle of thirds. You can see it in the circle of fifths, certainly, with the respective positioning of those two chords. With the sevenths chord map, there's some additional detail that shows that even more directly. So you can see here, for example, the notes of G major are G, B, D, and F. And maybe I can zoom in a little bit, notch closer. So G, B, D, and F are the constituent notes of G major. E minor, the notes of E minor are E, G, B, and D. Now these are all sevenths chords, meaning it's beyond just the triad of G, B, D. Notes G, B, and D are in G major, and I'm just adding that F because a lot of times substitute chords or borrowed chords come from sevenths chords, because with the 4 notes, it gives you more information to work with, or more notes, potential notes to swap out and serve as the basis of substitute chords. E minor 7 really has E, G, B, and D. So it has E, G, B, and D, which are similar to, at least some of the notes are the same as the G major chord. So G and B and D, those 3 notes, G, B, and D, of the G major chord show up in the E minor 7 chord, G, B, and D. The only 2 notes that these 2 chords don't share are E and F. So E and F are different, they're distinct between these 2 chords, but otherwise G, B, and D show up in both chords, and you can see it right there. So that tells us, oh, okay, so instead of a G7 chord, we can swap it out for an E7 chord, E minor 7 chord. They sound very similar, right? And so that tells us, hey, if we're playing a chord progression of 1, 5, 6, 4, and we look at this chord and we're like, hey, what chords, what other potential options here share notes, at least 2 notes, and in this case it's 3 notes, so it's an especially strong chord substitution. What other chords, potential options are out there that we can just jump to? And so to bring back the interstellar metaphor of moving through harmonic space, when Matthew McConaughey is in that black hole and he's like looking at this scene over here, or he looks over there and he's like looking at this scene over there, it's like, and how black holes are potentially or theoretically portals between different physical regions of space. These chords are also portals or jumping off points, wormholes between areas of harmonic space. So here, instead of, so G major and E minor are kind of like wormholes. There's a wormhole between them because of those shared notes. So we have, so we can do 1, 5, 6, 4, 1, 5, 6, 4, or we can play a 1, 3, 6, 4. And we're seeing it right there. As another example, well, let's look at the diagrams here. And, let's see here. Bill, you said, if there's time, can you explain how to use the sevenths chord map with secondary dominants using the seventh chords? Yes, we'll definitely check that out. Thank you for that that comment. We'll look at secondary dominants with this. That's a great idea. With the, oh, come on. It says that it's because I was on this page. Let me try that.
I need to log in on this tab. Just one sec. Let me come back to this. I'm just logging in to access this page that we were just looking at. And it's right there. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here once I scroll down. Okay, again, this is a post in the chords playlist in the library, but we just played the 1-3-6-4, right? Sounds good. You swapped out the minor 3 for the major 5. That chord progression in this post explains it's used in various songs that you may have heard before. And here we're going to use the 1-5-6-4 as the basis of various deviations. And so let's see. This is just showing how you can play 1-3-6-4 in all keys. All right, now we're going to, instead of the minor 3, the 1 minor 3-6-4, we're going to play the major 3-6-4. So it's going to go from now we're going to bump it up a notch and play, instead of E minor, E major for a major 3. So it goes. Sounds really good. 1 major 3 minor 6 4 1. Now, how did we go from a minor 3 to a major 3? Well, using chord substitutions and the idea of two notes that share, or two chords that share the same notes in common, we have, this is a new chord map for me too, so I'm breaking it in as we go. Let me just kind of give it a tug. Like I say, there's a video here in the start page, actually, for on mycolormusic.com, and then the start tab. It explains how to break in your chord map. So instead of 1 minor 3-6-4, we're going to play the 1 major 3-6-4, and we went from minor 3 E G B D to E G sharp B D. You can see here that this chord, E minor and E major, share, again, 3 notes in common. E, B, and D. E, B, and D show up in both of those chords. So we're going from minor 3 to a major 3, and then 6-4. So the ChordMap Sevenths version shows you that at a glance. Now, in this post, we also talk about how, you know, songs use that progression of 1 major 3-6-4, flat major 6. There's a song "Married with Children" by Oasis that uses that progression. It sounds really good too. So on the chord map, we're going 1 major 3-6-4, and then a flat major 6, 5, and 1. So this flat major 6, and actually, so Bill, we can talk about secondary dominants here. A secondary dominant is, and what we just played is actually a tritone substitution for a secondary dominant. So we're going to talk about secondary dominant, and then you'll see how we were able to, it's like chord substitutions on steroids. So check this out. If we were to play a secondary dominant, so the chord map shows 1, we could play, 1-5-6-4. Let's just start with that basic pattern. So we have 1, 5, 6, 4, 1. Now we could then throw in a secondary dominant to bring it back home to 1 again. So we went 2, 5, 1. The 2, basically a secondary dominant is just the dominant itself in a given key is the 5 to the tonic. So it's the chord just to the right or clockwise from the tonic. The tonic is the 1, so in this case it's C major, the point of resolution, meaning the chord that sounds the most stable, and it's a point of, okay, we made it back home. The dominant is a chord of higher tension. So those chords, those notes in that chord want to resolve to that tonic. To show it on piano, let's say that we have a C, E, and G. The dominant chord is a G major, so it's G, B, and D. The D wants to fall a whole step down to the tonic. The B, the leading tone, wants to rise just a half step to the tonic. So these two notes want to resolve to the tonic. So the B and the D of the dominant want to resolve to that 1. And then also we have the 5, which is just a fifth above the tonic, or the 1 in this case. And it just, in the circle of fifths, that chord wants to resolve to the 1. In the circle of thirds, it's a little more clear how that chord is related to the tonic. But those two notes of B and D, in the case of dominant chord, B and D want to resolve to C. The G also wants to resolve to C. And the 7th, in this case F and G surround C in the circle of fifths. So G includes notes, G major chord includes notes G and F. Those two notes flank C. So just like B and D in the chromatic scale flank C and want to resolve to C, in the circle of fifths, F and G also flank C. So all of the notes in this chord are, in essence, harmonically pointing at C, saying, it's like a big arrow saying, this is the tonic. So the dominant chord is like a big giant signpost saying, over here, the tonic's over here. And so it's alluding to or foreshadowing movement to that tonic. Likewise, the secondary dominant, meaning it's secondary, it's over an additional notch. In this case, it's literally the 2. It's the second in this context of C being the dominant. The secondary dominant of D major is a dominant to G. It wants to resolve to G. So because you have, let's look at that on the keyboard. You have, in the case of G major being the tonic, the D chord, D major chord, has D, F sharp, and A. F sharp and A want to resolve to C. A comes down a whole step to G. I said C, but I meant G. And then F sharp is a leading tone to G. So 2 of the notes in D major want to just gravitationally come to G. And then likewise, D is the 5th of G. And in the circle of fifths, it wants to resolve to G as well. Now, G wants to be between C and D because it is neighbors with those 2 notes in the circle of fifths. So if we play a D7 chord, it's the secondary dominant to G. So we have D, F sharp, A, and C. All of those notes have a giant signpost pointing to G, saying G is the point of resolution. So we have D is a giant signpost, harmonically speaking, to G, saying we want to resolve to G. But then G, in the context of C, is its own signpost saying, no, we want to actually resolve to C. So think of water cascading down, boulders. At a higher level, the secondary dominant is almost like higher up, and it's saying, okay, we want to resolve down to this level, but then gravitation, the harmonic gravitational pull, is bringing that water even further downstream to the actual tonic. So we have a secondary dominant, in this case it's a 7, G7, to a G7, to a C. Now, I didn't establish C as the tonic first to kind of have that cascading water flow metaphor make sense. So let's play C a little bit to kind of establish C. back and forth between C and 5. Now you can hear it because we established C is the tonic. So C is the 1 to a G7, back to a 1. So I'm just going from tonic to dominant. And then I'm going to throw in a secondary dominant here in a second. C, secondary dominant to dominant to C. So that secondary dominant, D7, wants to resolve to G7, and G7 is like, nope, I'm not the endpoint, I'm actually going to C. So that's the idea of the secondary dominant is, think of cascading water still pouring down the boulder, still making its way to the level, actual tonic, the actual resting point for the progression, given the context of the chords in relation to each other. And the chord map shows these relationships. Now, the secondary dominant is, like I say, 60 degrees away in the context of a circle from the tonic. It's the 2 to the 5 to the 1. But other chords can have secondary dominance. So, for example, minor 6, A minor, its secondary dominant just to the right, just in the context of major chords, to the right is D from G, the actual dominant in C. We're using C as our example here, but these ideas apply to all 12 keys. So, but the dominant chord, the secondary dominant, needs to be a major chord. So if we wanted to find the secondary dominant to this A minor, the minor 6, we would go to the right and say, okay, it's E, but it's not E minor because the secondary dominant needs to be major. So we're like, okay, it's E major because E is in the inner ring. Just to the right of A major is E major. Just to the right of A minor is E minor. But like I say, the secondary dominant needs to be from the major ring. So that's partly why the 1 major 3, 6, 4 sounds so appealing, because it has that secondary dominant going on as well. So we have, so we're playing the 1 major 3, which is the secondary dominant to the next chord, A minor, and then F to C. So that this progression of major 1, major 3, 6, or minor 6, and then major 4, there's a secondary dominant going on between that 3 and that 6. And then this is where it gets really cool. So check this out. The flat major 6 is like a secondary dominant to 5. It is, think of the flat major 6, A flat in this case, being a substitute chord for D. And what's really cool is you're like, well, how could A flat be a substitute for D? Of blue and orange, D is an orange chord, A flat is a blue chord. In fact, blue and orange are polar opposites. They're tritones. So how could a tritone be a substitute for another chord? Well, it has to do with tritone substitutions. And again, the idea of 2 chords sharing at least 2 notes in common serve as substitutes for each other. So let's say instead of 1, 2, 5, 1, the secondary dominant is the 2. Notice how D has D, F sharp, A, and C. So D, F sharp, A, and C are the notes in that chord. Well, if we look over here, way over here, so we're cutting across harmonic space, just like in Interstellar, where it's like it's like a wormhole across into a different part of the universe. We have A flat, C, E flat, and G. Damn, 2 of those notes are in common. The names of the notes are different. Well, C and C are the same. F sharp and G flat are enharmonic names for the same note. But notice how if we just refer to the color, we have a green square and a red square. We have a red square and a green square. So A A major, flat. I'm getting my tongue tied. It's hard to say some of these words and patterns with your mouth when you can actually just see them with your eyes. But A flat 7 shares 2 of the same notes as D7. So when we play the chord progression, this chord progression, oh, my screen went blank. Let me pull that up again. When we play this progression of 1, 5, 6, 4, and then an A flat, if we show that as an A flat 7, it's basically like a secondary dominant. It's a D major chord, like this tritone substitution, and then G 1. So from E major to A minor is a secondary dominant, and from A flat 7 to G is in essence like a secondary dominant. It's really kind of crazy how it works. And on the chord map, you can see this with the notes because of that additional information of showing the sevenths notes. So we have 1 major 3, 6, 4, and then a flat major 6, 5, and 1. The flat major 6 being a tritone substitution to D is like playing a secondary dominant to the 1. So I'm going to play this chord progression again with the traditional chords that you might hear. So in this example, I'm going to play 1, 5, 6, 4, 2, 5, 1. And it's going to sound good. It's going to sound right. And then we're going to play it like this, and it's going to sound extra spicy. So again, I'm going to play 1, 5, 6, 4, 2, 5, 1. So it's... Sounds good. One more time. Sounds really good, actually. I'm going to use the chord substitutions shown here with the major 3 swapped out for the 5 and the flat major 6 swapped out for the 2. And it's going to sound a little more like, whoa, what's going on, but also more interesting because it's more unexpected. So it's... Oh, hold on. My screen went blank. Kind of helpful to follow along. So we have... One more time. It just sounds so good. It's really nice. I like being able to have options at hand. And that was one of the biggest struggles I had when I was first getting into music and for the longest time, which is, wow, that was a really good chord progression. Like I would hear that chord progression is Married with Children by Oasis, which is actually a really, really good song. Arguably their best song. And it's like, how the hell did, what's his name? Noel Gallagher, who wrote that song, how did he know? And he wasn't using the chord map, but he had mapped out those chords in his head, which is amazing. And to be able to actually literally see the patterns is super empowering and a lot of fun. And we're only just scratching the surface in terms of navigating harmonic space and flying through these musical portals, these wormholes between seemingly disparate regions of harmonic space when they're really intricately connected. And it has to do with that collapse of the sun of music theory, I'm referring to lesson 19, into this concise, compact, musical gravitational mass of patterns, which is the chord map. Let's see. So let me get to Bill. You said so. A could be used. This is the secondary dominant of D. Correct. E is the secondary dominant of A, and so on around the innermost ring. Yes, that's a good synopsis of what we're looking at here. So in essence, let's see. Each secondary dominant is just to the right of the respective chords. So yes, and you can see with the color wheel, it's the color just to the right. So D is the secondary dominant of G, and we can rotate the numerals to the numerals rotate are consistent, fixed in relation to each other as you rotate. So 5 is the dominant of G. So 5 is still the dominant of G, but in the context of C, it's a secondary dominant to G in this case. And C, even though C is the 1 in this example, it's the secondary dominant to F because, in the case of F, the key of F, where F is 1, C is the 5 of 1. Well, if we're in the key of B flat, I'm just rotating the numerals along with the grouping here. We have, B flat is the tonic in this case, and F is the 5. Well, C is the secondary dominant because C, nothing changed about that relationship. C is the secondary dominant to F because it's just that way. I could rotate this grouping anywhere in the circle, and those chords are the same in relation to each other. Kind of think of it as like a party, right? So the tonic is the host of the party. They're the ones who throw the party, and the attendees are still the same. So for example, let's say, in this case, C is going to throw a party, right? So we just had the Super Bowl. C hosts the party at the Super Bowl, okay? And well, let's go back in time. I think the Grammys happened before the Super Bowl. I watched neither one. So the Grammys were the Grammys. C is like, you know what? I love music. I love the Grammys. I'm going to host this party. So C is like, you know what? I'm going to get the punch bowl. I'm going to buy the cupcakes, and we're going to have the party at my house. So C is the tonic. C is number 1. Well, F and G show up. They're like, hey, yeah, this is cool. Let's show up to this party, and we're going to watch the Grammys, and we're going to check it out. And so these chords get invited to that party. Well, a week or two later, whatever the difference was, B flat's like, oh, the Super Bowl. I love football, and I'm going to throw the party this time. So B flat now is the host. They bought they have the punch bowl, and they got hot dogs and pizza. Well, C is still friends with F. Like, even though C didn't necessarily get invited to this direct party, they're not inside the house, they still have a relationship to F. And so they might show up as a borrowed chord where you might include the C in a progression because C's a friend of F. F's like, you know what, C's with me, even though they're not part of the immediate group of friends. C, I am still friends with C, and so C's cool. C's cool with me. We'll let C in, and so you might have a chord progression like a secondary dominant that shows up because even though it's outside the key, the strict bounds of those chords within a given key, in this case B Ionian or the B flat major key, C shows up because C is friends with F, But the cool thing about the portals and the harmonic relationships between the various chords is you can start to incorporate chords that are totally far away. So in the case of the example we just played, where we had C, where we had in the key of C, we played this A flat. It's because D was like, or G, the dominant was like, you know what, D's cool with me. So, C's throwing the party. D's cool with me because we're friends, we're closely related. And if I throw a party, D is totally going to show up because we're closely related. So yes, C, you're throwing the party. D is outside that group, but we're friends, so we'll let them in. And then D is like, you know what? I share 2 notes in common with A flat, so they can come instead of me. So instead of me showing up to the party, even though I'm, close friends with G, I'm going to let A flat come in my place. And you end up with these like, you come up with some cool progressions where it's like, oh, that's unexpected. C didn't even necessarily have A flat in mind. They're like strangers. They don't necessarily know each other. Now, I'm using personified metaphors. They aren't strangers. They actually are. They have their own relationships at play. For example, the C note is in the A flat major chord. So C does know A flat in that sense. So they do have their own relationship. So this personified metaphor, take it with a grain of salt. Like it's It's not actually football in the Grammys, but so there is a connection there. There's a relationship and some commonality, but these seventh chords allow for seeing those portals, seeing those wormholes and those connections to be able to really pick out chords that aren't random. Noel Gallagher had kind of this mapping in his mind and was like, oh, that would sound good because that's a tritone substitution. And it's one thing to say tritone substitution, which is this abstract concept, and it's another thing to actually see it physically, to hold it in your hands, to play it, and create music that way. And I'm using the guitar as the examples here, but we can play these patterns on any instrument. And because music theory crosses across instruments, you can play it on any instrument you choose. So we are at the hour. That hour, in my mind, went by pretty fast, actually. That was a lot of fun. And so definitely check out the playlists at mycolormusic.com. Thank you for your support. As a supporter here on Locals, you have access to all of those posts and much more to come. I'd love to hear your feedback on the scale diagrams as I'm rolling out that series on scales and modes. And we're going to be playing with these chord maps, both the sevenths and the original chord map, with lots of geeking out with music theory. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining, and we will talk real soon. We'll see ya.